Good afternoon and a very warm welcome back to TaxCalc TV. As always, we are hell-bent on bringing you the very finest in insight and advice on how you can make your firm and your life somewhat better. This week, we continue with our spring series on mergers and acquisitions. 2 weeks ago, we were joined by Julia Whistler from Folger Underwood, who gave us a whistle-stop but intensely packed hour on the state of the market, the sentiment, particularly how firms, the larger firms, are seeking to grow through acquisition, often in response to the impact of private equity marching in on the market. But today we're kind of shifting a gear a little. We're going to be looking at possibly one of the more tricky parts of a successful acquisition, that being the integration of the teams post merger. So it may be that you find the financials look good, the commercials look good, but when you actually put the teams together, tension's going to rise and it can start to derail the whole affair. So I am joined by two guests who can share a whole lot of light onto this and hopefully make your next acquisition or your most recent acquisition a lot more successful. So first of all, James Woodfall is an expert in business communication and takes a sort of scientific and psychological approach to how teams integrate. James, would you like to just tell us a little bit about your background, your experience?
So most of my background is in financial services. So I was a financial planner, a wealth manager for over 15 years. I ran my own business, which I through the course of that, I acquired a business during that journey, and then I sold it about 3.5 years ago. So I've been a buyer and a seller. But also, I think so since doing that, and sort of slightly before that, I did a couple of master's degrees, one in communication and behaviour analysis, and one in psychology. So now, basically, I kind of approach sort of people issues within businesses from kind of a coming from the practitioner side, but also coming from the academic social science side as well. So to see actually how can we understand a bit about behaviour and what's going on in organisations.
Fantastic. Thank you for looking forward to this. And also we're joined by Laura Kenyon. So Laura is the the founder and co-director of LKA, Chartered Accountants down in Surrey. And Laura has recently been through an experience which may well colour what we're talking about. Laura, do you want to tell us a little bit about your recent exploits?
Sure. So we've just been on our own since the business was founded, just growing organically, finding our own way. We picked up a couple of pockets of fees here and there, sort of, a few tax return clients and a few companies as people were retiring. But over the last 6 months, we've gone through and successfully completed on an acquisition of a small firm locally to us in Richmond upon Thames. And that firm is about 1/3 of the size of our previous size. So it's fairly significant in terms of size. There's about 500 clients in that company that we've bought. So there's an office, there's staff, and there's clients. So it's a whole new way of working for us. It's our very first acquisition. So this is, where we are.
So give us a sense. So previously you had how many staff?
Previously, we had 18 staff, and now that's gone up to 23, 24 staff. So it's a fairly significant increase in terms of staff and office space and clients. So we've now gone up to 1,500 clients. We previously had 1,000 clients.
Right. So it's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's a huge chunk. Yeah.
So I happened to be chatting to Laura, and this came up, and I mentioned that we were going to be doing this webinar, and we thought it'd be very interesting to get her take and her experience of kind of what's been happening and what the fears that she had before this process started. So Laura's going to be contributing when throughout today's session. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you all for coming. we're going to be looking very much at the risks that we expose ourselves to when we go through an acquisition, how we can, why those risks emerge, and what we can do to mitigate against them. So let's first of all look at the challenge. Let's look at the size and the shape of the problem. So James, what do you see? What can get in the way? What does derail when we're trying to bring, say, in Laura's case, a firm that 1/3 the size or half the size of the firm that she's already got, 1/3 of the size she's already got, into a larger firm? What can go wrong?
Oh, where should I start? I think it's worth probably just saying, look, I think one of the problems, the reason why actually getting the people bit right is so important is because it's far more costly than just, say, losing an existing member of staff and thinking, oh, I've got to go through the pain of replacing them. Because I suppose when you lose a kind of an existing staff member, you know that when you go to replace them, it's not cheap replacing people, because there's things like recruitment costs. There's potentially you lose clients if they're client facing. As good as restricted covenants are and that type of thing, you end up losing a few. But then when you go to replace people, you've also got that kind of time lag of how long it takes a new person to be productive. Get in the business, start going out and learning how the business works. Then start, if they're fee earning or client facing, how long it takes them until they're productive. There's various different takes on how much that costs, but it's tens of thousands really. So I think when you go through, a merger or an acquisition, you've almost got this other cost to it as well. Is the fact that if you lose people, post the deal, not only have you potentially got to go through that painful experience of replacing them, but you've also got that other issue of the knowledge has just walked out the door as well. And that is going to be really hard, I suppose, to put a figure on. So I think it's doubly painful, I think, if you lose people in that sort of integration phase, post acquisition.
What about the impact, though, that if you don't have a gelling of culture, of teams, put on a personality level, that how does that tend to proceed?
Yeah, I think the reason why, I think from the people side of things, it's so important to get it right is because there's a couple of different, I suppose, factors at play psychologically, I suppose, when you sort of bring different teams together. And one of the things that is really important is about identity. So within psychology, there's or social psychology, there's various theories about how we kind of construct our identities, which is really this kind of concept of how we perceive ourselves, internally. And we have sort of, say, a map of understanding of like who we are as a person. And part of that is tied to some of the roles we play. So, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend. But actually, we also have workplace identity as part of that. And workplace identity is quite dominant, actually, in terms of our overall identity, because we spend so much of our time at work. Work makes up, it's quite sad, actually, when you kind of add up the numbers. Do you spend more time at work or with your kids?
Yeah.
But workplace takes up so much of our time. It's quite a dominant part of our identity. And so the way that we kind of, express our identities, we then have part of this which is relational. It's like, well, who are our friends at work? Then we have sort of ownership of like, well, what sort of projects and processes of the business are we, am I kind of an owner of? If I've been around in the business for a long time, do I have some sort of status or social standing in the business? Like, am I the go-to person for X in the business? Do I get part of my sort of fulfillment at work from being the best, most knowledgeable person about this topic or that system or whatever it is. And then also, of course, you have, well, look, where am I in the firm in terms of seniority? Because of course that's quite important for people. because part of the work, there's a theory called social comparison theory, which is actually part of some people's subjective well-being is actually by comparing where their standing is against peers. There's a little bit of variance with that. Some people really kind of lean into that, and they they like keeping up with the Joneses and looking at kind of how they stack up against peers. But the reason that I think identity is so important is you can see there's multiple kind of components to this, which it touches upon. And actually, when businesses go through significant change, a lot of these things get disrupted. So, where do I stand in the company? I'm a team leader or manager or next in line for that role over here. If I move over here, is someone now being brought above me? Is this two of us doing that role and one of us is now more senior? And so you get people who kind of will, they really get upset about that and think, well, I don't like, I don't like that, I'm going to leave. You've also got things like, ownership of sort of processes as well. So you might have sort of that legacy issue of kind of people have designed systems and processes in business. They've got kind of ownership of them. And then if they're brought into a new business where they're being told, well, actually, that's not how we work, this is how we work. Then they sort of cling on and go like, well, no, that's that was my baby, that project, and actually to kind of let go of it's a bit difficult. And then I think the thing I was mentioning about kind of next in line for a role, that's quite key as well, because I think as business owners we have a different mentality. We have kind of an entrepreneur mindset that we get paid. The value that. So our reward comes from the value that we create within a business. Whereas employee mindset is different. I work for X company. I'm paid effectively for my time, but I get other value into extract other value out of the role in terms of job fulfillment for other things which kind of evolve within that. So it can be quite difficult for us as kind of business owner entrepreneurs to kind of make that leap. Back to if you were an employee before you started your business, do you remember what it was like to be in a company? Yeah. And actually, I've not been employed for probably about 15 years, but I do remember, when I was, it was always like, well, where am I now? What role am I doing? What role do I want to be doing in 2 or 3 years' time? What do I have to do? What do I need to do in order to get that job? And so you've got to think people have also got this kind of internal kind of career map, if you like. That's another thing which gets disrupted when you go through this sort of transition of merging or acquiring companies, is that people don't know or don't have a sense of how they fit into the new organizational chart and where their career might be headed. And so I think one of the things that's quite clear from 50 plus years of research into this within psychology is that you can pretty much, if you have uncertainty, you get anxiety. Because ultimately, the brain doesn't like uncertainty. Uncertainty could mean threat, it could mean opportunity, but the brain does, but we don't know. And most people tend to be, will default to threat. Actually, right. My job's at risk, whatever it is, they'll catastrophize. If you let them. So I think actually uncertainties is probably one of the biggest, I think, causes of anxiety, because ultimately we don't know what the solution is. And what the brain's very good at is, because it doesn't like uncertainty, it likes coming up with a story, and even if it's completely fabricated and invented.
So that's a natural response, is to sort of say, okay, I'm going to create a context around why whatever is happening, whether that's true or not.
Mm.
So Laura, when you were going into this, what were your fears? What were you most worried about?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point about workplace identity is really, really interesting that you said that, because that was probably, the biggest fear is about how we could keep the culture that we've got, but also, not try and break the culture that they were bringing in, because we're going to learn from this culture as well, right? So how do we merge two quite different businesses without, completely breaking it, basically, because it can do. I mean, worst point, people leave, clients leave, this is my fear. And, we're still here. We only acquired the company at the beginning of April, is, that there's no certainty at the moment whether the staff are going to stay necessarily, or the clients are going to stay, because, we don't really know how it's going to work out. So that is the biggest fear, is the uncertainty. It's not knowing. But yeah, the workplace identity was a really, really interesting. We were lucky enough to meet all of the team before we actually legally bought the company, which was really, really helpful. And if anyone gets the opportunity to do that in the future, then that's really helpful to do, because the first thing that they are very keen to share is where they fit in their existing business. That's exactly what they wanted to share with us, James. When we met, this is my role, and this is how I work, and this person in the office is the one who we always go to for this. And that was immediately, genuinely, the first thing they said to us when we met was, this is where I am and this is how I fit in.
That's
right?
interesting, isn't it?
Really interesting. And then from our side, when we obviously shared with the team what's going on in the existing pre-acquisition company, the first thing that people started saying was, well, how is this going to change my job? Genuinely, of course, that's the first reaction. So the uncertainty of how it's going to change. But my worry, if you want to go, my worry was that, that we couldn't make this culturally merge, and that it would just have the uncertainty would just make people too nervous, and they would just, cut their losses and leave straight away, whether they were a client or a staff member.
Yeah, or you end up with kind of two separate businesses.
That's crazy, right? So you don't want that. That's just really silly. That's not very healthy at all, and that wouldn't work in the long run.
Well, what about processes here? I mean, it's I'm just trying to think of the damage that a poorly conducted integration gives you. I mean, I'm your processes get derailed, people stop sharing, those kind of things. Is that something that you see and something that you fear?
Yeah, completely. So at the moment, it's all about learning and listening where we are. I mean, we're very, very early in the integration process. We're sort of 6 weeks in. So, again, this is our first time doing this. We had the sort of, we'll give it a month to sort of see how the dust settles, and then we'll start, moving everything onto the LKA way. There's no way we can do that. We're 6 weeks in, and there's a lot of listening and learning and observing that has to be done before we can suddenly, try and change things, try and move it to the ways of processes that we're working on right now. And I think we have to just, we're accepting that that's absolutely fine, because otherwise, something will break down. But I think we just anticipated that it would be a lot easier to just, let's just look for a little bit, and then that's it. Then we'll just change this. This is going to take a lot longer than we first anticipated.
Absolutely. So, and James, you must have seen this where processes get disrupted, and it's not just about whether people stay, but the impact on kind of the harmony, I guess, within the existing firm can be quite detrimented.
It kind of works both ways, doesn't it? The kind of mechanism I was saying, about you've got the people in the firm that's been acquired have got all these questions, but you've got to remember that your existing team do as well. So you can't just, all the focus can't just be on the new, on the new people coming in, because actually the people in the existing business have got exactly the same things going on their head. And Laura, we had a chat a few weeks ago, before this call, and we were saying actually it's funny what questions are on people's minds.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you remember what you said? Would you mind sharing that one?
Well, the first thing that somebody asked about when we explained about the acquisition was, will they still come? Will the new people come to our summer party?
Yeah.
That was the first question.
First question, will they come to our party? Well, yeah, of course, it's our party. It's all of our party. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And then obviously, will my job change? That was question number 2.
It's do you remember The Office when that came out? It seems like 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember there was an episode, wasn't there, where they merged, didn't they, and they acquired another office? And I was thinking about that because I think looking at what they did within that kind of episode was very, very good if you go back and watch it. There's all of the problems that I think that you'd probably notice if you went back and watched it. You'd go, those writers really knew, like they really had their finger on the pulse about what happens when you merge teams. Because one of the theories within social psychology, which I think which is part of it, was actually social identity theory. Some researchers, they took the experiment they did. They took a group of I think they were like Boy Scouts. They took them out to the country, and they did little experiments where they split them into groups. And you're like the red team and the blue team, and they played little experiments about what happens when you put people into different teams. And they found out that when you separate people and you give people separate kind of team identities, they very quickly form very strong in-group, out-group biases. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is that they have sort of a preference for people in their tribe, and people outside that are the enemy. They're the threat, they're a risk. And they found that actually the researchers found that you could make those groups totally arbitrary. It could be like who's got a mug and who hasn't, or wherever it is, or it doesn't matter what the separation was. Is that just if you draw a boundary and create us and them, you create kind of the conditions for conflict. Mm-hmm. And that's, if you go back and watch that episode of The Office, that was.
I'm going to do that. Definitely.
I think comment was we're Slough, and I can't remember who it was.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Swindon. Yeah.
Swindon. Yeah.
I'm actually from Swindon as well. That's really weird.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
There you go. I'm from Slough, so we shouldn't. I'm not actually. So look, we're going to go on and we're going to try and sort of debug and look at these in more detail. What I did want to do, a couple of questions for you in the chat. I'm going to put the polls live. I'm interested to get your experience of how much acquisition that you have done. So I'm about to put that one live. So I'm just, are you a veteran? Are you a novice at doing acquisition? So a little red dot will appear in the polls, and I'm going to put a second one live, which is really around how concerned you are about the practice acquisition process and how risky you feel it is in your circumstance. I should say, while you're answering those questions, that a number of you have found the chat already. Bottom right hand, I probably shouldn't need to point that out, but the chat is there for you to chat. The questions bit is if you want to put a particular question to us, but you don't want everyone else to see it, that's private to us. So you can use that as well. We do love your questions. So if anything spikes your interest, or you want to explore something further, or you just have a comment that might be pertinent, please do add it in there. And I should also say, yes, this is being recorded, and you will get a recording afterwards as well. So no need to take notes unless you really want to. So it looks as if the majority of the people, we've got a split, in fact. So we've got a number of novices, but also about a third of the respondents are veterans who've been through multiple acquisitions. So we've got a bit of a split. And we've got probably, most people are somewhat concerned, a couple of people very, very concerned. We've got a minority of saying, I'm not concerned at all. That's very cocky of you. You're very brave. So yeah. So there's genuinely some reasonable levels of concern about whether this could derail a firm. So let's look then at let's break down some of the most common issues that we have, and let's look at why they arise and what we can potentially do about them. So what's the kind of biggest one, James?
Well, I think I can't really say there's probably one biggest one, but I think one of the things which can be really difficult is people resisting change. So I think if you've got people who and there's probably a number of factors into this, but they won't really resist change, to the point where they can be probably quite vocal about it. And then one of the risks,
This could be from either side of the acquirer or the acquiree.
Yeah. The risk of that is that, especially if they've got a bit of kind of influence within the company as well. So one of the things which you kind of, which you kind of have within businesses is you kind of have your sort of organizational chart, don't you? Of like, your sort of hierarchy of, kind of, leadership, call it. But you also have informal networks. So people who are, say, really trusted, and sort of go-to people who do have a lot of influence in terms of, thinking within, teams, or across organizations, for example. So they can either be really, really useful if they're on side, but it can be terrible if they're not. Because if you've got someone who's, anti-change or anti what's going on, and they've got the ear of other people in the business, then it can be really dangerous, and it can derail what you're trying to, get done as leaders.
So, so that emerges, and I mean, we've talked about the causes of that, but is there a way of mitigating against that? What can you do?
Well, I think the kind of solution with that is really you have to get a bit curious about what is it that's going on for the individual that's resisting, and see if you can surface which of those factors it is which is causing them to be resistant. So is it, for example, that they're not happy because something has impacted their future career plans. So there's kind of, solution for that is going to be actually, it doesn't matter whether it's your existing team or kind of the inquiring team. One of the things which will need to happen, within that sort of post-acquisition period, is everyone needs to go back to development planning. To looking at what is your one-to-one development plan within the business over the next, say, 1 to 3 years. Now it might be that you bring in, that might be a process which people haven't had to go through before. So you might be bringing people in and new teams, and you're sitting down and you're introducing them to kind of that might themselves be a new way of working.
Yeah.
It's surprising. It surprises me actually the number of businesses that I speak to who don't do any sort of annual kickoff day where they communicate to the entire business what their aims and objectives are for the company over the next 3 years. And they don't do any form of one-to-one career development with staff, or any quarterly meetings, or any sort of updating people about where the business is headed. These are pretty basic things, but it sort of surprises me actually how many businesses I speak to that say, well, we don't do any of that. We just go whichever way the wind blows, and we hope everyone sort of comes along with us.
So if you're someone who's that's always been the situation for them, and then you move into a kind of more sort of formal environment, that can feel quite disconcerting, even though the intent of it is to put arms around, make people feel confident. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it can be, because I think one of the biggest feeders into motivation, at work is autonomy. Which when you're running a business, it can be quite difficult to get your head around, because I think maybe you don't want to give people entire autonomy entirely about how they work. There needs to be some sort of system, process, sort of checks and balances in. But actually, if people have a sense that they have some degree of autonomy in terms of how they actually do their work, it's very, very important for motivation. So let's say if you go from an environment where people have effectively no rules and they just kind of turn up to work and they can do whatever they want, versus actually they move into, say, a larger business which has gone through that sort of growing pain of, okay, we're a small business where we're just figuring it out as we go along, and we've never had to document our processes. They've gone through that growing pain of, they're now sort of a medium-sized team where actually, if we want to grow further and we want to bring people in, then actually we do need to write down what we're doing and how we're doing it, so that we've got some processes we can refine and update, as we take the business forward. If you've got a small business that then goes into that, those people are going to feel like their autonomy has been taken away, because now they're given kind of an operating manual for how to do their job, and they think, well, hang on a minute, I've been doing it X, Y, and Z way for years.
So is that because what you're essentially doing is taking a business that, say, for example, got 4 people in it, that would evolve to 12, 15, 20 people, and they would kind of go through that experience. What you're doing is circumventing that evolution and just saying, right, you are now part of a business with 30 people in it. I mean, I guess, is that kind of how you're seeing it, Laura? Is that you? I don't know if that's
you basically just described what we did. Yeah, so we completely did that. I mean, I started the business, it was just me, and I went through that pattern of, and I can completely see. So we're operationally very, very different to the firm that we bought, which is our whole ways of working. But it probably is because of the size we are now. We have to have processes in place. We have to have a practice manager and all the clarity and all that centralized information. We have to have the same working papers that everybody uses. Whereas where we were before and where the company that we've acquired is that it is freestyle. You know, there's only 4 or 5 of us, just do what we want. But that's what we did. That's completely what LKA did when we were 3 or 4 people, because it's fine and it works then because it's small enough to have your arms around it. So that's really hard, actually, going from, you've described what's happening and I've just gone, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Obviously, I grew through that, but slowly over like several years, and put in.
You could see the point of every element.
But we've just gone from 0 to 60 with this, and that's really, really hard. I can see for it happening. So it's about us being able to share those benefits and go, well, look, completely, this is how this can help everybody, and also ease it in. As I was saying before, we definitely can't suddenly change everything at once. That's obvious, isn't it? Right. But there's more understanding, well, it might be that our processes aren't quite right anyway, and we might need to tweak them by learning from the new business, right? And I'm pretty sure we will do that. There's definitely things that they're doing that we're going to be learning from. So, but yeah, it's brilliant. It's hilarious. You described exactly what that is, but what's happened, because we have got everything systemized, everything, and we've got working papers that we want everybody to use now. So.
Just on that note, there's a question from the chat. How do you get? And this is very specific. I'm not sure how accurately we can answer, but how do you get the new team to adopt working papers, processes without that kind of pushback? Are there techniques that you can apply, kind of understanding that predicament that the team is in, to say, okay, you need to adopt this, and I guess how do you present that in a way that doesn't get pushed back?
Well, I think the kind of research on kind of what motivates people, we've got I suppose different types of motivators, intrinsic, and extrinsic, so there's a difference between doing something because you believe in it, which are quite strong. We're quite strongly motivated to do things which in line with our values or align with things that are important to us. We're not particularly motivated to do things just because someone else tells us to do it. That's just the way we're wired. But I think if you want to get people to adopt processes, I think actually Laura, this is entirely relevant, is that you need to first, before you get to telling them what to do, you first need to acknowledge how they're feeling. And that by simply just being a bit, empathic in your communication, and just go, look, I get this must be a bit, overwhelming for you, actually, that we're coming here with all these different ways of working. And you can actually tell them that story, Laura. You can say, well, look, actually, I used to run when there were 4 of us, this is how it used to run. And what happens to a business as it changes over time is, you bring more people in, and you can't have someone go on holiday for 2 weeks and everyone else not knowing how something works. You just can't do that within a business past a certain size. So that's the reason why we have all of these. But actually, one of the things which is really important that you said was that you haven't got a fixed mindset. And that's really important for people's kind of, as I said, about autonomy is a big motivator. And also about intrinsic motivators as well. If people feel that they have a bit of a say, they're more likely to be on board. So if you've got this, it's a good mindset to have, is to say, look, this is the way we do things, but I'm happy to admit that I might be wrong. And I'm more than happy for you to, give feedback or put your, or give us your opinion about how it should be done, because you know your job better than I do. you've been doing it for, I haven't done your job, for example. But, so I think it's the right mindset to have, rather than just expecting that you communicate to people, right, this is how we do things, this is our operating manual, get in line.
Yeah.
That's where you get the biggest resistance.
I guess there's an element of that says, by definition, by imposing a process, by imposing a new way of working, you are implicitly suggesting that theirs is inferior. And you're not necessarily, you're just saying, well, but that's just the way we do it. But that's, you can understand why that happens. So I guess you've got to present it in a different way to sort of say, look, bear with us, I guess ask them what their process is, and maybe maneuver to change your processes.
Exactly. And I think one of the pieces of research I did a couple of years ago, my dissertation was on emotional intelligence and job performance. So actually, one of the things which is really important to understand about emotions is that if someone is experiencing, a strong reaction or emotional reaction to something, they will not listen to logic or reason until you've dealt with and handled the emotion first.
Okay.
So that's why I said start with empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
Because quite simply, if you just say, look, I've noticed that actually you're a bit frustrated, maybe even a bit angry about this change. You're just basically saying to somebody, you're giving them an opportunity to say, well, yeah, actually, this is what is on my mind about it. And then if you listen to that, it's out there. Then it's not in their head, buzzing around, for days and days and days, until it turns into a problem where they go, I can't deal with this anymore, I'm just going to have my notice in. If you surface it and get it out, then you can deal with it, and then you can actually have a dialogue as just to say, well, look, this is the reason why we're doing this. Because people are far more receptive if you acknowledge and deal with the emotion first. So
the answer to the question is really just, be empathetic, deliver a flexible solution rather than an inflexible one. I mean, this is tough for me. I mean, I'm on record as saying that all change is bad and should be bad. I'm struggling with it, but I'm on record as saying that, I believe. So there's the process side. What about like client relationships? How does that do we see that as an issue where clients have traditionally been handled in one way, and then they're handled different? What's the thoughts around that?
Well, Laura, have you had any experience so far?
So we're trying to keep everything pretty much as it was for the time being, and reassuring clients. And we were somebody told me before we went into this as well, because they'd gone through an experience where their own accountancy practice had been acquired, and the onboarding side of things was really terrible. So I said, right, you've got to tell me exactly how it worked and how terrible it was, and please forward me the emails that you received so I can see why it landed so badly with you. And it was and we'll do the opposite. We'll basically be very, very communicative, very much about reassuring. And it was all about, we're not, the same staff are still going to be there, your services are staying the same, and that reassurance. But what we're trying to do as well, even though there's 500 clients, is we're offering every single one of them a phone call before they then have to necessarily sign new terms and conditions, and which also before they didn't have all of these things either. So everything that we're trying to bring in is actually completely new for the clients as well, from a relationship side of things. So it's about giving them the opportunity, like you're saying, James, for us to listen to them first as well, because this is a big change for them. So tell us, new client, you're a new client for us, but what worked really, really well for you before, because we're not going to try and change that, this is what we do. We do some other things as well. Would that be interesting to you? So try and just add to their existing service rather than try and change it. There will be different ways of tech that we're going to be engaging with them, with different bits of tech and so on, but try and speak to them about it before we then land them with digital signatures and letters of engagement and, you know, online sharing and so on and so forth. So just try and give them the opportunity to communicate with us, try and verbally communicate with them before sending them very, very dry letters, which is what happened in the bad example that I was showing. Was basically they just got an email saying, here's a new letter of engagement, here's where you put your bank details in, sign it. Genuinely, that was the first email they had from the new acquiring company, which obviously that's quite an extreme example, but does illustrate the point, really, doesn't it?
Because it is a very common issue that people, I don't know if this is it's just a fear, but that notion, I don't want this getting out that I'm selling because my clients will all leave.
Yeah.
But maybe that's true. Maybe that's just an irrational fear. I don't know if there would be you may have seen that, James, but I guess you do have to treat them in the same way that you treat the team, in terms of saying, okay, I'm flexible, you know, things may change, and how would you like it to change, I guess?
Well, from the client side, yeah, I think I think, you know, so my background is, you know, is financial planning, and I think actually it's the same principle, is that actually it's a high stakes, you know, trust based service, and it's a relationship led service. And I think that's one of the things from the client side of things, you know, having been, you know, an acquirer, you know, and sort of taken over client relationships, is that, you know, clients are a bit like employees. What's going to change? How's it going to affect me? And who am I going to be able to talk to about it? So I think especially if clients are used to dealing with a particular person, you know, in a business, that's when I suppose actually transitional relationships can be a bit more risky. And you do have that, you know, you do have clients that have been hanging on and have maybe not been particularly happy, and they just actually a change of firm just is the excuse that they've needed to just go, well, actually, I was thinking about leaving anyway. So you get a bit of that. But I think just put your fees up by 50% and they'll leave anyway.
It's a tried and tested way of going about it. So, question in from the chat that, and this is something I wanted to touch on, is about due diligence. If you're going through an acquisition, you're looking to buy a firm. Now, I think we talked about this before, Laurie. You know, if you're recruiting a person, you'll probably have 1, 2, 3 interviews. You might get other people in the business, talk to them. You're not doing that generally. You were lucky, but you're bringing in a block of people pretty much without interviewing them or potentially meeting them before the process, which seems insane.
Yeah.
What can be done? I mean, and what do you want to look for in their personality, or are there red flags that you can say, hey, this is one we want to watch, this is going to be tricky?
So you want me to answer what we did, or you want James to answer?
Yeah, well, let's go with your experience first. I mean, we were lucky in that we were able to meet the team before, and we did think that was hugely important. Equally, the seller did as well, because that was his top priority, that his team were looked after and valued and kept in place, because they were running for, you know, years and years and years, and he didn't want that to change. So we were able to talk them, but we definitely wanted to meet them more, but equally then weren't really supposed to, because it wasn't an interview process. So what we thought really hard about, right, we've got a really small period of time with these people, what can we ask them that we're sort of allowed to ask them when we're in a room? And it really was just understanding, so where do you fit in the what is your work identity, where do you fit, what do you do, and so on and so forth. But you know, we two-peed everyone across anyway, and we're not intending to get rid of everybody, but it is an insane situation. So, but then again, you do the due diligence on the business as well, right? So if the business is functioning well, it's a small business, they're obviously profitable, you know, that's been running for years and years, it's got to be working well, okay? So it's our responsibility to carry that on by bringing it in to LK. It's clearly been working for years and years and years, so we don't want to break it by changing it. Let's hope the people work. But those people need to be able to get on and relate and integrate with your team. You know, otherwise you're going to have two different businesses. So I'm just wondering if there's sort of red flags that you would look for that say, okay, this is going to be more of a challenge. We need to pay real attention to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one thing that I was going to say was from their side of things, they're obviously vetting us as well completely, you know, because so their immediate questions as well, that they had immediate questions to their bosses. So what are we like? You know, are we a laugh? Have we got a sense of humour? Are we weird? You know, how do we
That's
there you go. So we were completely on, you know, it was like some sort of weird date, like weird speed date where they were trying to suss us out, we were trying to suss them out. But yeah, any red flags, yeah, just basically very guarded, you know, with body language as well. You know, if anybody's sitting there with their arms crossed and not wanting to look, but that wasn't there at all. We have been really fortunate. There isn't that at all, because I think the due diligence went so far on both sides to make sure that the culture was right, that we have the same values, that actually that we didn't let it get to that. So that's where the due diligence on the culture is really, really important. And that was why we were successful in this acquisition. There were like loads and loads of different offers, but actually it came down to the real questions about what we're like, what our values are, before we could even get into the numbers.
I see. And James, what would you say to that? I mean, in terms of that part of the process prior to the acquisition, are there things that you can spot? What should you be looking for?
I mean, it is quite a privileged position to be in, to be able to actually speak to the staff before you've bought the business, and I can imagine a lot of acquisitions that it doesn't happen that way. But what you can do, I think, absolutely is look at alignment of things like culture and values, because if you can get that right, it actually will solve kind of a lot of the issues, you know, that I've been talking around, you know, people's kind of identity and what motivates them at work. But if you can actually do a bit of kind of looking at actually who's in the business, you know, speak to the people that you're buying the business from, and get their kind of, you know, overview about who's in the business, what role do they do, you know, where do they sit within the business, what are they responsible for. You can then kind of look at, well, actually, you know, who's going to be, you know, put out or upset, you know, because then when you do that mapping of where are they, well, you know, what does the organizational chart look like pre and post, you can then start to see, you know, are there any people who would potentially flag as people who might be, you know, at risk because either, you know, their sort of hierarchy's changed, you know, sort of status in the company's changed, or, you know, ownership of certain things have changed.
So if you look for change, so draw a red circle around, right there, this person's role will change. This person's role is going to stay the same. Nothing's going to affect them, probably green. And then map out where those sort of heat spots are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then sort of, you know, and have that post-acquisition plan of, well, how are you, you know, how are you going to deal with it? So is there, I think, a more specific, targeted, you know, communication strategy with particular individuals? You know, to get them, you know, to one, give them the opportunity to sort of surface, you know, concerns, because what you're doing pre is you're kind of flagging that it might be, but that's an assumption.
Yeah.
You might actually post it, you find that actually people, they're like, oh yeah, fine, yeah, whatever, all right.
Actually, we are finding that somewhere. Yeah, that is just a little point of positivity. We are finding people are them more accepting of change than we thought. Again, it's that unknown. You don't know if they're going to we just assumed that they wouldn't want to. But actually, some of the like most extreme changes that we're suggesting are like, yeah, fine, whatever. You know, whereas other points really aren't. You know, so.
Well, that's the thing, is that not all change is bad, is it? You know, you might actually have people sitting there just thinking, actually, this is brilliant. You know, what I'm hearing is fantastic. I actually suggested that as an idea 2 years ago, and it wasn't implemented. Absolutely. You know, so I'm really pleased that that's the way you do things. So
I refer to you my previous statement that all change is bad, and just to be clear. I just wanted to break just as we come to the end. There's a couple of really interesting bits that I wanted to pick up on, but I did want to put a final poll live now. If anyone watching is not familiar with TaxCalc, we are a full suite of tax and accounts production software, and we're twinned with Engager, which is a full cloud practice management solution, which goes from end to end, right from client onboarding right the way through, and is an essential tool in terms of building the structures. If you are going to acquire another firm, then being able to bring those firms together on the same software can be very powerful. And you're going through that situation with TaxCalc and your new acquisition at the moment. That's right, isn't it, Laura?
Correct.
So I'm put a poll live, and it's basically, if you would like any follow-up on TaxCalc, if you would like any follow-up on Engager. There's also, James, you had a couple of options that people are able to follow up on. So you've got a health check and a diagnostic.
Yeah, I think one of the, I come on these, these as a sort of an expert speaker, and one of the takeaways usually is people say, well, what is it you do actually, or if we wanted to work with you, what does that look like? Typically what I do is I kind of work on a kind of a consultancy basis. So usually it's a case of I'll speak to a business who's got some sort of people issue, and as an applied psychologist, really we have a bit of a kind of a scoping session to figure out where's the business at, what types of things are going on. Can I help, and what would that look like? And then the sort of social scientist part of me, I can come in and do research through the business, be it speaking to staff and doing things like thematic analysis to kind of sort of surface some of these issues, put that into a report, with recommendations, about how you can sort of use sort of communication within the business and to overcome them. So some of that might be me helping deliver it, delivering training or working with people one-to-one as well. So I'm an accredited coaching psychologist. But then, I think the other thing I've got is kind of a free diagnostic tool. I can put the link in the chat if you like, but it's based really around people and M&A issues. So it's a quick 5-minute set of questions you can answer, and it will kind of sort of score you on a dashboard of sort of six things that can surface themselves as risks. So I'll stick the link in the chat. If you want to have a go at that, then you can. And if you want to book if you want to have a chat with me, then by all means.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. So I just did want to just pick up on a couple of bits. So I was chatting to a person I met at Accountancy, and I was telling them about what we were doing, and they were talking about the level of emotion that they were experiencing with the firm that they had acquired. They were all quite emotional people. So I don't know what, if you've got any comments on that, James, sort of what's going on when people, you're crying, you're not what's going on there?
What, if people are crying?
Yeah.
Well, we cry for many reasons. We cry when we're happy. We cry when we're sad. There's a difference, I suppose, within crying, because you kind of sort of you're sad. There's different definitions of that, sort of different distinctions in that. Grief is different from just losing something of value. But we experience emotions in kind of various different ways. But I think that crying, at sort of relief or happiness is I think is quite important not to kind of confuse that with with sort of someone being sad. It can be quite easy to do.
But they're crying. It's a release? I mean, what?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, so when we kind of experience emotions, so emotions have they're part of, I suppose, our brain's system, which I suppose evolved to kind of protect us from certain threats in the environment. I mean, most of the time in the world we live in now, we're not dealing with threats in the way that we have done for most of our evolutionary history. But we do have a set of kind of basic emotions, like fear, anger, sadness, and they all have universal triggers, so themes that trigger them. So for sadness, for example, the universal trigger for that is loss of something personally significant. And actually, with emotions, we also have intensity, so how strongly we feel them. And so crying usually tends to come out when we've kind of, something has triggered that response, and we feel quite an intense reaction, that usually then sort of physically manifests itself as, sort of tightening of the muscles in the neck, which cause the vocal cords, to change the sort of quality of the voice. So when you sort of hear people are upset, their sort of voice breaks, doesn't it? And they struggle to get the words out. And that's really because you've got these muscles really clamping down in the neck, that muscle tension, which is a nervous system. It's a nervous system reaction, and crying's part,
So that is part of the fight or flight thing, is the tension of.
Well, the fight or flight really is you've got the nervous system kind of, operates within two branches, rest and digest and fight and flight. Some of the, and actually emotions do different things within those. So you can actually be activated in terms of what would be called fight and flight through being excited. So you've basically, you're either rest and digest or you're
up and going.
Up and going, yeah.
Okay.
But you can be in that because of fear as well. But I mean, there are slightly different changes in terms of what it happens. But your heart rate will go up if you're scared. Your heart rate will also go up if you're excited.
So in that, so seeing if one of your newly acquired team members breaks down on a fairly regular basis, you don't need to consider that as necessarily they're in a terrible place. There's a number of reasons that they could be doing that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I think it's a bit of a signal, isn't it, that you need to intervene if they're breaking down and crying on a regular basis. Then I think it's that's a sense that something's going on. You don't know what's going on, but it means that you've got to have I suppose a bit of a deeper conversation with them. And actually, emotions are. They're very complex things, but we all have them and we don't necessarily understand them. But actually, there's a few rules for kind of dealing with them in a healthy way. One of them is to kind of let them out, and actually at work, it's actually quite healthy if people are able to express their emotions at work, because it means that there's a bit of a degree of trust within the people that are around them. Versus when people suppress their emotions. There's a lot of good research about emotional suppression and then actually poor health outcomes like, links to stress, burnout, poor heart health. So actually emotional suppression isn't very good for us, but healthy emotional expression is quite good, which is again why I said actually earlier in the call about, if you want people to listen to your advice or implement a new behavior and they're experiencing an emotional reaction to it, you have to deal with that first. So one of the rules is, healthy emotional expression is quite good. Labeling and surfacing emotions actually helps us move past them. So this is why I said some of those statements like, I can see you're getting a bit frustrated with this. I understand that actually this changes, I can see that I understand this changes, might be difficult for you to deal with. Those are kind of statements that kind of
recognize
it and labeling it, because people might go, they might not have recognized it themselves. They might go, well, actually, maybe I am a little bit. Maybe I am.
Okay. Brilliant. Awesome. Well, look, we have come to time, but that's a great place to end, I think. It's a fascinating topic, and it really is interesting how people, the human angle comes into this world of accounting, which is often dominated by numbers and rates and regulation, but there is a very human angle to it. I'm glad we had a chance to address it. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for joining me, James and Laura. Really appreciate your time. I hope that if you do go through an acquisition in the near future or in the distant future, it goes better than you hoped. And we will be back next week on the 27th when we're going to be looking at the tax ramifications of an acquisition. So if you are selling your practice, how can you structure the share scheme so that you can shelter yourself and your staff and your family from the taxman as much as possible? Just a quick note, we will be in Manchester on the 16th of June. I've just put a link in the chat for that. So we've got Fusion in Manchester, which is on the road. session. James is going to be there. Looking at a slightly different subject. We're going to be in central Manchester on the 16th of June. Please do come and see us, and you can find out everything about TaxCalc and Engager that you didn't know already. On that note, I want to say thank you once again. Take care. All the very best. Bye-bye.